Brutal bombshell in Formula One. Lewis Hamilton breaks his contract with Ferrari due to a breach of clauses and announces he will immediately join Red Bull, replacing Yuki Tsunoda. If you want to know the contract breaches and the reasons behind Hamilton's departure from Ferrari, stay until the end. This video is for you. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Lewis Hamilton's astonishing transition to Red Bull racing was not the impulsive headline-grabbing bombshell the world perceived. It was the final act in a long, quiet, and deeply personal unraveling. Beneath every celebratory Instagram post, each cryptic answer in a press conference, and the orchestrated smiles for the cameras, there was a world bursting with silent disillusionment. He had not only grown disenchanted with Ferrari's operational inefficiencies and cultural rigidity, but also profoundly betrayed by a structure that invited him as a guest and never intended to crown him as king. From the moment he signed the contract in Maranello, he was dreaming in red but dying in silence. While the fans cheered his arrival as the man destined to bring back the glory days of Schumacher, Hamilton quickly realized that he had walked into a museum masquerading as a racing team, a place more preoccupied with honoring its past than creating a future. The very culture he was meant to revive suffocated any attempt at innovation. Meetings were rigid, soaked in tradition, where dissent felt like heresy. Hamilton's proposals to overhaul data interpretation systems, to enhance cross-department agility, to bring modern structures borrowed from Mercedes' winning blueprint, all met resistance hidden behind polite nods and later buried in further consideration. Every week became a chess match of navigating egos, especially those aligned behind Charles Leclerc, whose growing comfort within Ferrari's hierarchy contrasted painfully with Hamilton's alienation. Frédéric Vasseur, once a close confidant during the negotiations, slowly became a distant echo. Early promises of autonomy turned into corridors of red tape. The words "we'll get back to you" became a refrain. When Hamilton noticed the shifting weight of development updates favoring Leclerc, especially in aerodynamics and rear suspension calibrations, he confronted the design chief only to be met with blank stares and non-committal answers. It became undeniable in Fiorano when his simulation feedback, clear, precise, repeated, was not just ignored but seemingly overridden. A rear instability issue he flagged multiple times had not only gone unresolved, but had been further accentuated in the latest upgrades. He had been used as a cover, a symbol, a temporary marketing revival, but not as a true partner in Ferrari's future. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Then came Zandvoort, the race that shattered any illusion he had left. The tire call that saw him helplessly skating on intermediates while the field shifted onto slicks wasn't just a blunder. It was symptomatic of a team no longer listening. When he sat in the engineering room post-race, the silence after his piercing words was deafening. He didn't yell. He didn't slam a table. He simply stated, "This isn't just bad luck. This is sabotage by complacency." That phrase lingered in the air, a chilling indictment from a man who had stayed loyal longer than he should have. From that moment, something changed. The sparkle in his eyes during media days dulled. The grip on his phone between sessions grew tighter. His smiles, once genuine, became careful veneers stretched over raw discontent. Meanwhile, far from the political inferno of Maranello, Christian Horner was watching. Not with opportunism, but with strategic foresight. Red Bull had built an empire around Max Verstappen, but empires built on a single pillar don't last forever. Horner saw the storm brewing within Hamilton. He recognized the exhaustion, the disillusionment, and more importantly, the hunger that still burned behind those tired eyes. Through a web of discrete connections, Horner began to send out quiet signals. A word passed through a Monaco personal trainer. A subtle comment relayed by a shared sponsor. A neutral inquiry dropped during a joint charity appearance. It was a courtship not of desperation but of deep respect. Horner didn't want Hamilton for what he had been. He wanted him for what he still could be. Eventually, the masks dropped. A meeting was arranged in Lake Como. No entourages, no PR puppeteers. Just two men, a lake breeze, and a bottle of Barolo that grew warmer with each passing hour. What began as polite conversation turned into confession. Hamilton spoke without hesitation, without calculation. "I feel invisible. Not to the world, but to my own team. I was brought in as a savior, then treated like a burden." Horner responded with quiet conviction, "You're not a burden. You're a weapon." That sentence didn't just resonate, it ignited something. In that moment, the idea of Hamilton in blue began to evolve from a fantasy to a mission. What followed was a campaign executed with the precision of a covert operation. Lawyers worked behind digital firewalls, trade terms encrypted, confidentiality clauses embedded so deeply that even high-level Red Bull engineers remained oblivious. Adrian Newey was intentionally left in the dark, not out of disrespect, but to preserve absolute secrecy. When he was finally brought in, his reaction wasn't resistance, it was curiosity. If we can engineer the fastest car, why not engineer the most complete driver partnership of all time? The contract wasn't just about money or podiums, it was about legacy. Hamilton would be involved in the shaping of Red Bull's post-Verstappen strategy, its entry into sustainable tech, and its long-term commitment to reshaping the narrative of Formula One. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Hamilton didn't sign a contract, he signed a revolution. He demanded influence over chassis development cycles. He asked for a seat at the table in junior driver development. He negotiated input in how Red Bull structures diversity initiatives in motorsport and demanded that his voice in social impact projects be matched with real institutional support. He refused to be just another marquee name. He was there to build, to shape, to transform. Even as the news broke, shockwaves rippling across paddocks, analysts scrambling to rewrite predictions, fans both ecstatic and furious, Hamilton remained calm. He knew the noise would be deafening. He also knew that behind every scream of betrayal was a whisper of admiration. In Ferrari red, he had hoped to become a legend. In Red Bull blue, he would become an architect of change. The world will look at the headlines and think it was about money, fame, revenge. They'll analyze telemetry and speculate on power dynamics. But the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth, is that Lewis Hamilton left Ferrari because he was tired of pretending. He chose Red Bull not just for wins, but for freedom. And in the high-octane world of Formula One, sometimes the most powerful move is not the one that wins you the race. It's the one that reminds the world who you really are. As soon as the first hint of rumor slipped through the cracks and found its way to the Mercedes boardroom, Toto Wolff knew something wasn't right. Not just in a strategic sense, but in his gut, something personal, something unresolved. The world believed that Hamilton's departure had been clean, dignified, even mutually beneficial. The PR campaigns had been smooth, the final race handshakes warm but measured, and the official statements polished to corporate perfection. But deep down, Wolff knew it had all been a facade. The kind of ending written by media managers, not men who had walked through fire together for over a decade. There was no closure, no catharsis. Only silence. And Toto hated silence. Haunted by what felt increasingly like a betrayal, not of contracts or strategy, but of trust and loyalty, Wolff took the unusual step of arranging a private, off-the-grid meeting in Vienna. It wasn't formal. There were no engineers, no legal teams, no PR officers. Just two men sitting across from each other in a discreet cafe that overlooked the Danube, the kind of place where words carry more weight than press releases. And this time, words did come. Raw, unfiltered, and painful. Toto didn't start with an apology, but he didn't have to. His face carried the kind of exhaustion that no race calendar could cause. I underestimated the cost of transition, he finally confessed. Not to the team, but to you. We thought we were preparing for the future, but maybe we forgot who built our past. He looked Hamilton in the eyes, not as a team principal, not as a boss, but as someone who had been beside him through victory parades and crushing losses. We treated you like a legacy driver, he added, voice tight with something between guilt and regret, when you were still capable of leading the future. Hamilton didn't interrupt. He didn't even flinch. He just stared for a moment, then spoke, slowly, with that precise calm that had often disarmed journalists and critics alike, but which now carried an unmistakable edge. It wasn't just the future you prepared for, he said. It was the erasure of everything before it. The silences after races, the clipped responses in strategy debriefs, the way you started speaking about youth and fresh energy like I wasn't still in the fight. His voice never rose, but each word landed like a calculated strike. And then came the story Toto would never forget. There was a team dinner, Hamilton said, voice distant, like recalling a memory already packed away. One of the new engineers stood up and introduced George as the team's senior driver. No one corrected him. You just laughed. I laughed too. But I knew in that moment, I was already gone. The words hung in the air, heavier than any contract clause. You had your chance to close my chapter with honor, Hamilton said finally. But you turned the page before I finished my sentence. Wolf tried. He really tried. The seat was there, available, unrestricted. But it didn't stop there. He offered equity in the Mercedes Formula E team. A multi-year extension. Even the unheard-of option for Hamilton to choose his own race engineer and lead a bespoke development division within the team. The kind of deal legends are built around. But Hamilton declined. Not out of pride, not even bitterness, but principle. To him, going back would be an admission that respect could be retroactively bought, that the soul could be negotiated like a salary. And Lewis Hamilton had spent too many years proving that he was never just a driver in a car. So when the world suddenly woke up to the news that Red Bull Racing had announced Hamilton as their next headline signing, the paddock didn't just react, it imploded. In a sport where headlines are currency, this was a generational earthquake. Verstappen, usually unshaken, composed to the point of being cold, found himself pulled into a private briefing with Helmut Marko and Christian Horner. The meeting was supposed to be strategic, calculated. It turned tense within minutes. Verstappen wasn't yelling, but his voice carried an intensity that cut through even the most rehearsed lines. "What are we trying to do here?" he asked, jaw clenched, arms folded. "Win championships or sell drama to the media?" Marko tried to neutralize the temperature by saying Hamilton brought legacy presence and could accelerate marketing synergies, but Max wasn't buying it. Horner pushed the party line. Nothing changes in the garage, no shift in car development priorities, and Verstappen remains the centerpiece of the future. But Max had seen enough behind-the-scenes maneuvering in his career to know when the ground was shifting under his feet. And this felt seismic. He left that meeting with more questions than answers, retreating not to his publicists or trainers, but to his inner circle, a group of confidants built over years, people who saw through the gloss and could talk to him without filters. What was initially just private venting evolved into deeper discussions. About contracts. About clauses. About possibilities. Mercedes. Ferrari. Even Audi's upcoming project. Doors that had seemed permanently shut were now slightly ajar. And Max Verstappen, for the first time in years, was considering the unthinkable, not because of ego, but because he sensed the wind's changing direction. This wasn't just about two drivers or two teams. It was about identity, loyalty, and power. It was about a sport that constantly reinvents itself but rarely reflects. The paddock became a minefield of whispers. Mechanics spoke in hushed tones. Engineers speculated over simulator schedules. Journalists camped outside motorhomes like vultures over fresh carrion. The narrative had cracked wide open. And in the middle of it all, Hamilton said nothing publicly. Not a tweet. Not a quote. Just a presence. Calculated, confident, unbothered. Because this time, the statement wasn't in words. It was in the very fact of his return, not to the team that let him go, but to the one that once seemed his greatest rival. And in doing so, he didn't just rewrite the grid. He rewrote the story they had tried to write for him. Sponsors didn't just react, they detonated. Within hours of the announcement, marketing departments across the globe lit up like Christmas trees. Puma executives called emergency meetings to strategize an unprecedented dual-brand campaign featuring both Verstappen and Hamilton, two of the most marketable athletes on the planet. They weren't content with just adding Hamilton to Red Bull gear. They envisioned a new subline, a luxury sport hybrid aesthetic fusing Hamilton's personal fashion brand with Red Bull's aggressive energy. Internal projections forecast a 300% merchandise spike in Q1 alone. Meanwhile, Tag Heuer, long a staple in F1 circles, found themselves cornered. Their ambassador program, once built entirely around Verstappen, now faced an identity crisis. Meetings became heated as executives debated whether to shift toward a dual focus or restructure entirely. The idea of creating two separate campaigns, one with Hamilton as the face of innovation, the other with Verstappen as the embodiment of dominance, was floated and immediately greenlit for testing in European and Asian markets. Simultaneously, Netflix producers swarmed like sharks sensing blood in the water. Drive to Survive had seen drama before, but nothing like this. They dispatched additional crews to Milton Keynes and to Hamilton's private training base. Confidential production memos leaked, describing this season as potentially the most explosive in the history of the sport. Producers weren't just looking for standard interviews, they wanted helmet cam footage, unfiltered garage audio, and private team briefings. They pushed FOM for exclusive access to mid-season debriefs, even offering to delay release dates in exchange for behind-the-scenes footage of the Hamilton-Verstappen power struggle. One executive was quoted saying, "This isn't just a rivalry, it's Shakespeare with carbon fiber." Television networks had to tier up their promotional schedules. Sky Sports immediately cut new promo reels with dramatic voiceovers, comparing the Hamilton-Verstappen pairing to Ali versus Frazier and Senna versus Prost. ESPN commissioned a documentary team to follow the two drivers throughout the season, dubbing it Legends Collide. Streaming platforms began lobbying for mini docuseries, while sponsorship slots for F1 programming sold out within 48 hours. Online, the situation was no less chaotic. Social media platforms saw engagement spikes that shattered previous records. X, formerly Twitter, trended with hashtags like #ClashOfKings, #Hamilton vs Verstappen, and #Red Bull Civil War for 5 consecutive days. TikTok exploded with fan edits, mock team radio dialogues, and speculative team orders dramatized with music from inception. Reddit threads ran hundreds of comments deep, with users analyzing telemetry data from past seasons to predict who would gain the upper hand under Red Bull's 2025 technical package. But the real storm was building in the background, inside Red Bull Racing's headquarters. The engineering floor, typically a well-oiled machine of silence and precision, turned into a battleground of competing preferences and split loyalties. Hamilton's arrival brought an immediate disruption to the status quo. His engineers requested changes to the chassis design, emphasizing different weight distribution and a lower seating position, preferences that ran counter to Verstappen's finely tuned setup. Engineers found themselves walking a tightrope, balancing Hamilton's needs without compromising the reigning champion's dominance. The simulator team was forced to split development time between two distinct driving styles, an unprecedented move that required around-the-clock shifts. Coders had to rewrite algorithms to process dual driver feedback, and disagreements broke out over which inputs should take precedence during updates. The result was a bifurcated development path, one that some insiders feared could slow the entire upgrade cycle. Even the softer side of F1 operations wasn't spared. The hospitality suite, previously designed around Verstappen's entourage and branding preferences, was deemed insufficient. Hamilton's team required a parallel setup that met his wellness standards, PR needs, and sponsor obligations. Interior designers were brought in to create a mirrored VIP zone, effectively splitting the Paddock's social ecosystem. Verstappen's father, Jos, reportedly made disparaging remarks about the circus now engulfing the team, while Hamilton's management pushed back against any move that positioned their client as the second driver. The political undercurrents grew toxic. Every minor gesture, a handshake, a team photo, even the order in which drivers appeared in press conferences, was analyzed by fans and pundits alike for signs of favoritism. And in the middle of this boiling pot of expectation, friction, and pressure stood Christian Horner. The team principal found himself in the crosshairs of the most complex management task of his career. Balancing two world champions with alpha personalities, global media attention, and diverging technical needs was no longer a hypothetical, it was his daily reality. In one candid moment captured off-camera, Horner leaned toward a senior advisor and muttered, "If we pull this off, we'll be legends. If not, we'll make history for all the wrong reasons." Another insider said Horner was rotating between crisis meetings and PR briefings every 45 minutes. Team-wide memos emphasized unity, but morale was splintered. Longtime Red Bull staffers confided that the stable identity they'd built around Verstappen was fracturing. Engineers felt overworked. Junior drivers were disoriented. And Helmut Marko, never shy about his opinions, reportedly warned, "There's no room for two kings in one kingdom." Yet amidst the chaos, the allure was undeniable. Every Paddock whisper, every leaked radio message, every slight change in facial expression between the two titans became ammunition for a ravenous media ecosystem. F1 had entered a new era, not defined by lap times, but by narratives. This wasn't just a story about two drivers. It was about identity, power, legacy, and the irresistible gravity of rivalry at its most personal. Would Hamilton bend to Red Bull's hierarchy, or would Verstappen be forced to share the throne? Would they find mutual respect, or would this combustible pairing implode under the weight of expectation? Hamilton, however, remained composed, almost unervingly so. While social media erupted with debates and pundits speculated endlessly about his motivations, allegiances, and mental state, he moved silently, precisely, deliberately. He didn't post cryptic messages or grant provocative interviews. Instead, he packed up part of his training base and moved it to the Austrian Alps, not far from Red Bull's own facilities. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He was getting closer to the enemy, or perhaps closer to understanding what had made them nearly unbeatable in the modern era of Formula One. His new training camp became a fortress of solitude and obsession. There, with snow-covered peaks surrounding him, he trained harder, woke up earlier, and pushed deeper into both his physical limits and psychological barriers. He began interacting with Red Bull's highly praised performance coaches, not just for fitness, but to explore their philosophies on reaction time, pressure management, and neural feedback loops under extreme stress. They were surprised by his approach. He wasn't a veteran coasting into retirement. He wasn't seeking ceremonial glory. He was breaking down walls within his own mind. He didn't carry the aura of a legend protecting his legacy. He was acting like a rookie desperate to earn his seat. And that disturbed people. Greats usually fade with pride. Hamilton, instead, evolved with purpose. Then came the unusual request: access to historical telemetry. Not of his own, but Verstappen's. Specifically, Verstappen's behavior and decision-making during wet conditions. Corner entries, throttle lifts, mid-turn corrections, exit differentials. He wanted it all. Analysts whispered that it was a bold move, some even called it invasive, but Hamilton didn't flinch. "I want to know everything," he reportedly told an engineer in a conversation that quickly circulated through the paddock like wildfire. "I'm not here to coexist. I'm here to conquer." That line, once leaked, wasn't just a quote, it became a manifesto. It was printed on t-shirts, debated on podcasts, analyzed on sports panels. But to Hamilton, it wasn't for anyone else. It was a commitment to himself. This wasn't arrogance. It was clinical curiosity wrapped in the armor of a man who had nothing left to prove and yet was still searching for the ultimate version of himself. He was already statistically one of the greatest, but there was something left unsaid, unwritten, and unclaimed. A final act. A final signature on the history books. And to do that, he would have to do what no one had ever even dared to attempt. Because no driver in the long, intense, and cutthroat history of Formula One had ever worn the red of Ferrari, the silver of Mercedes, the orange of McLaren, and now the navy of Red Bull. These were not just teams, they were dynasties. Each with their own cultures, secrets, politics, and gods. To be part of all four was to be a living paradox: the prodigy, the tactician, the statesman, the rebel. Hamilton wasn't a man driving for teams anymore. He was becoming something else entirely. A symbol, perhaps, of what it means to transcend the machinery and enter the realm of mythology. The media couldn't find the right label. Some called it betrayal, a slap to Mercedes, the team that had stood by him. Others hailed it as a renaissance, a rebirth of ambition at an age when most would be eyeing retirement. Some just saw it as a gamble, a final roll of the dice. But Hamilton wasn't playing games. He wasn't hoping. He was planning. Coldly. Carefully. This wasn't about a farewell tour or a last dance. This was a chess match, and the endgame was in motion. Within the walls of Red Bull Racing, the mood was complicated. Verstappen, dominant and confident, didn't voice concern, but behind the smiles and camera flashes, something subtle shifted. A new gravitational force had entered the team, not just a driver, but a legacy. Engineers found themselves split, loyal to Max, curious about Lewis, uncertain about the new dynamics. And Hamilton didn't try to charm them. He didn't force camaraderie. He arrived early, stayed late, asked quiet questions. He studied the systems, the language, the pulse of the team. He didn't try to be liked. He tried to understand. And late one evening, deep in the simulator bay, the lights low, the room quiet except for the hum of data streams and the soft clack of keyboard strokes, a mechanic who had once set up cars for Vettel's title runs, tuned the balance for Ricciardo's flair, and optimized Verstappen's brutal efficiency, paused. He looked at the screen, then at Hamilton, helmet still on, eyes focused, hands calmly resting on the wheel. And in a moment that felt almost sacred, he whispered without turning his head, "He's not here to be part of the story. He's here to write the ending."